first, we wanted to just go over a few PowerPoint slides, and I think someone's going to share those for me, just to give you a little bit of information about NextFifty initiative, as well as kind of some general information about the funding opportunity itself. And there they are. I'll also just say I have a bit of a head cold today, so if I sneeze or have to grab my tea, you know what's happening, but I'll apologize in advance for this very nasally sort of sound that I have going on today. So this is obviously just an overview of this flexible support opportunity, but we always like to start by talking just a little bit about NextFifty initiative. Some of you may be very familiar with us, but some are not. And NextFifty initiative is a Colorado-based private foundation really focused on supporting efforts that improve the lives of older adults or their caregivers. We were formed in 2016 through the sale of InnovAge, which was a nonprofit PACE program for all-inclusive care for the elderly provider, and they converted to a for-profit entity. We were created, NextFifty initiative was created as an independent nonprofit entity and retained the focus on serving older adult population based on where that funding came from, where that money came from. As part of our formation agreement, it is stated that 80% of our initial corpus and any associated investment income after that goes directly to benefit Colorado residents, and 20% is unrestricted, meaning we can fund and do fund nationwide. In 2021, we awarded $12 million in grants. For those of you who are familiar with NextFifty initiative, you know that we've been grant making ever since our formation, and our grant making has evolved over that time. We historically were focused on very project-based types of funding, and then incorporated some different funding opportunities like the Community Response Fund. 2020 changed absolutely everything, as you can imagine. And so we had several different funding opportunities. We could go back a couple slides, you think. There we go. Oh, just to the purpose. And so as we saw the impact COVID was having on organizations that were serving older adults, and really everyone in general, we really wanted to look at how can we get dollars out, not necessarily as quickly as possible, but in a way that best supports what organizations are trying to do. And so last year we created flexible support. And really the purpose of this funding opportunity, is to be as flexible as possible, but to help organizations and programs serving or seeking to serve older adults achieve their goals related to improving the lives of older adults. And so it also obviously allows NextFifty initiative to continue learning what organizations need and how these flexible dollars impact their work with the older adult population. Next slide. So who's eligible for flexible, who and what are eligible for flexible support? Eligible entities include 501c3s, C4s, and C6s, as well as government entities. And requests for funding can include, a variety of things. Implementing newer innovative projects, startup costs for older adult programs or services. You maybe never served older adults before but want to start. Or funding to support existing long-standing programs or services, again, dedicated to serving older adults. Next slide. We require that you submit applications using our online system. There's a link to that system online, and I would recommend, I'll have Tiff add our website link to the funding page, because there's lots of good information on that page as well, but there's also a link to the application system. So this round of flexible support funding will have a rolling deadline, and it'll be open this year until all of the funds are expended. We're going to try to make notifications within about 3 months of the grant submission. If there's a delay in that, we'll be in touch and you'll know why and what we might need to move that along. And we have one key difference from last cycle of flexible support is that we do now have a maximum request amount of $150,000. And just as was the case last cycle, partial awards are possible. Next slide. A little bit about what won't be funded. And again, this information is also on our website. But obviously, these funds need to be directed to individuals age 50 or over or their caregivers. So anything not directed to that population would not be funded. We will not award funding to applications that include reimbursement of individual bills, such as rent assistance, mortgage assistance, or household utility bills. We will not fund any lobbying efforts, political campaigns, or those supporting a specific political position. We also won't be funding any event sponsorships. And then we will not fund type 3 entities. Sorry, this chat is blocking me here. Type 3 non-functionally integrated supporting organizations. Next slide. So online, we have information, as I've said a few times now, about this funding opportunity, including the questions that we're going to ask you. We have the questions posted, but we also have downloadable Word versions of the applications that you can utilize as well. And we're really evaluating applications based on those questions. So we want to understand your organization or your program or your project's connection to the older adult population and any target populations that you might have. We really want to understand what your goals are related to improving the lives of older adults and how relevant those goals are to that. We want to understand how you'll use these funds to achieve those goals. We want to understand your organization's need for funds. And this really speaks to organizations who might have a budget surplus of some kind. Why are these dollars needed? Is there something that within your budget that is dedicated to other programs or services and you can't use them for older adults? Just helping us better understand the financial picture for your organization outside of what those financial documents themselves might show us. And then obviously the thoroughness and timeliness of your submission. We want to make sure that the application is complete. We get the information we need and that it's submitted timely. Oh, I knew those dogs were going to bark pretty soon here. Sorry about that. Next slide. And I'm still muted. So if you are awarded funds, our expectation is that you will sign a grant agreement for those funds. And we would like to ask that you review that grant agreement in advance. It's linked on our website. There will also be a link within the application. We will not be making changes to that grant agreement. And it really is a very simple grant agreement, in my opinion. But we request that you take a look at that before you submit your application so that you know at the end you're prepared to sign it as is. We will also have end of year reporting. If you've gotten funding from us in the past, you know we've typically had a mid-year sort of progress report due. We're really just looking at that end of year. How did these dollars help you achieve your goals? What does that look like? What we're doing with current flexible support grantees, and I imagine what will continue with this cycle as well, as we're doing oral reports. So really just having a conversation at the end of that grant period and talking about what happened and whether or not you achieved those goals. And then there are some specific requirements for organizations who have expenditure responsibility. So the IRS regulations require us to collect additional information from organizations that are not 501c3 public charities. So usually governmental entities, universities, that type of thing. So we do require a budget be completed only for applicants who have an expenditure responsibility. There is no budget requirement for any other application. And so we will need a budget at the end of the year showing where those expenses went from any organization with expenditure responsibility as well. Next slide. So we really are here to help, and we really do want to talk with you. And we are scheduling calls left and right with organizations to answer questions specific to their application and whether or not it's a fit for this opportunity, and any other questions that might come up over the course of you preparing your application. There's information on the website about how to connect with the NextFifty initiative staff member and get one of those calls scheduled. We will try to keep the questions in this Q&A session as general as possible. If you want to talk specifically about your application, I would encourage you to set up a time to talk with one of the NextFifty initiative staff. And as I've said probably 400 times already, there's lots of great detailed information on our website, including guidelines, tip sheets, and so much more. So please do review that information. It's there to help you, but I also want to encourage you to reach out. And when we say reach out, we mean initially as you're working on the application, when you're ready to submit the application, whenever you might have questions about your application or want some guidance or support, we're happy to take those calls. We're happy to provide that information to you. So now we're going to move in to some Q&A, as I mentioned. And as we do so, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime here, Tiffany Welsh. Tiffany, give a little wave so people can see her. Tiffany is the Program Operations Officer at NextFifty Initiative, and she will be helping me respond to some questions today, but she'll also be monitoring the chat. So anytime you have, you post a question in there, I see there's 114 participants. I thought that was 114 chats already. My heart almost stopped beating. It'd be great if we got that though. So please make sure to put your question in the chat. And you can also use the raised hand feature if you know how to do that. Let's see if I know how to do that. I think someone walked me through this yesterday. You can use the reactions and down at the bottom in the 3 little dots tab to help you raise your hand. And then we'll get to you as we can kind of make our way through that. And as you know, we asked you to submit any questions that you had along with your registration. And so that wasn't required, but thank you to those of you who did. It helped us really get a sense of what are the types of questions people have. And we're going to start with just a couple of those questions to kickstart, though I think we have plenty in the chat to get us going as well. So is there anyone who, or Tiff, I'll start with you, I guess, sorry.
Yeah,
the
sure.
first couple questions that we have.
Yeah, sure. There was some overlap in some of the questions that we got, so we decided to pull a couple out. One of them that was asked quite frequently is, what are NextFifty Initiative's funding priorities?
Yes, thank you. And that was a pretty common question and something I think we hear a lot when we take calls from folks as well. So I'll just say we don't have funding priorities, honestly, outside of obviously our focus on older adults. We really want to understand each applicant's connection to older adults, why they need the funds, what the funds will be used for, and most importantly, what the goals of the organization or the project or the program are towards improving the lives of older adults. So there's really no priorities per se, just as long as there's a focus on older adults and your application is clear in responses to the questions.
All right, another one that we get asked frequently, since we do have a focus on Colorado, how are out-of-state applications evaluated?
Sure. As I mentioned we got so many different variations of this question as well, including should out-of-state entities even bother applying? And I think when people see that 80-20 split, 80% being in Colorado, 20% out of they think there's no chance. And that's not the case. We fund outside of Colorado quite frequently. I would just say to you, there's a whole calculation associated with that 80-20 split that we aren't even close to. So there's no reason for you to focus on that necessarily. It's really about the application itself. We don't apply any different type of metrics or evaluation to out-of-state applications. We really look at all applications with the same evaluation criteria, regardless of where they originated.
Okay, we have a question in the chat. How much total funding is available this cycle?
For this funding opportunity, we have around $8 million available. And as I mentioned, the cycle will be open until those funds are expended. So could be the course of the full year, it could not be. We're not really sure what to anticipate.
Okay, and then another one, for the $150,000 max, is that inclusive of indirect costs? Can they be part of that 150,000?
Yes, indirect costs can be included in the funding that you request. And again, unless your organization has some type of expenditure responsibility, you don't have to fill out a budget to kind of indicate what's indirect and what isn't indirect. But yes, those would be appropriate costs to include.
Okay, and we have a couple of questions regarding the ineligibility of type 3 non-functionally integrated supporting organizations.
Well, that's a great question. It's a classification from the IRS. It would be on your 990 if you were a type 3 non-functionally integrated supporting organization. So I would refer to your 990 to see a better definition of what your organization is.
Okay, and this one was asked and answered in the chat. Are the photos on our website available for organizations to use if they're working with older adults? And I put the link in there to our photo gallery. And yes, those photos are available, and we hope that people do use them. You're welcome to download them and use them as you see fit. And will the PowerPoint and links be emailed out to participants?
We certainly can. Yeah, that's not a problem.
All right, we're cruising. Does end of year mean end of the calendar year or end of the grant term?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I talk about this funding opportunity being open until the end of the year, I mean the calendar year, or until the funds are expended, obviously. But you'll have, if you're awarded funding, you'll have a conversation with your program officer about your the term of your agreement. So when the project or the funding or whatever is to start, and what would be a year after that would be the end date, obviously.
Okay, how many grants will we be funding?
Oh, that's the $1 million question. I don't think we have any sense of that. Last cycle, we received 250 applications. I think, if you can correct me on my numbers, 180 were
cycle. There were, yeah, I want to say we did about 130 out of 236 or something.
But I will say it just varies every year, and it depends on the size of the grant. Obviously, we get very large requests, we get smaller requests. Well, now we'll get requests up to 150. And last cycle we had requests as small as $3,000 and $5,000. So it really just depends on the types of applications that we get. I did see a couple of hands. Christopher, you put your hand down. Did you want to ask your question?
Sure. There was a lot popping in the chat and I didn't want to interrupt those questions. So what's interesting about this flexible funding cycle, you kind of answered part of my question, which is you don't know when those funds will be expended, which makes sense because that's hard to predict. And since we're current grantee and are looking into what our future funding opportunities with NextFifty could look like, I guess what I'm wondering is I had read on the website that NextFifty is sort of doing this process while strategic planning is happening simultaneously, which may inform, future funding cycles. Do you know if any of those future funding cycles are likely not to happen until this is fully expended, if that makes sense, or when those sort of post-strategic planning funding cycles may or may not start? I'm not sure if you have any timeline ideas around it, maybe.
Yeah, we do have a timeline around that. So thank you for that. We, part of what we wanted to do with flexible support, again, was as an organization, continue learning about the impact of different types of grants We could award to organization different types of how flexible funds impact organization as opposed to those that are very project specific, which we have a lot of information about. So this is helping to inform that strategic planning that's happening right now, but we are on course to hopefully, I'll say we're on course to launch a more diverse funding and investment strategy in 2023. And so we want to have information out about that sooner rather than later, obviously, for organizations to be able to digest and see what might be coming and that sort of thing. And so this opportunity is meant to get us through to 2023, again, until those funds are expended, but this will be, the main opportunity for NextFifty initiative for this current calendar year. And then we'll share information as soon as that strategy is ready about what that looks like moving forward. Of course. Lauren, you have your hand up as well, and then we'll pop back to Tiff in the chat. Oh, Lauren, you're on mute.
Silly me. Okay, sorry about that.
No
I understand that you define older adults as over the age of 50, right? And so we're a national organization with several programs. And for some of our programs, we collect age data, and on others, we don't. So if we're applying for a general operating support grant on a national level, what is the best way to show you that those dollars would be used kind of solely for adults over the age of 50?
That's a great question. And it's hard to say. We're not looking for any specific sort of here's how many older adults we serve, or here's the percentage of the population that we serve that are older adults. But we do expect that these funds are solely directed to older adult programs or services. And so if you're looking for general operating support for an organization that serves multiple age ranges, general operating support probably wouldn't be a fit for that type of organization. We would need you to narrow it down specifically to a program or a service or a department that is solely focused on older adults. And what we would need to see again is just what are those goals for the funding? What do you hope to achieve with that funding? What goals do you hope to achieve with the funding, and how are those going to improve the lives of older adults?
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. We have one more hand. Let's get that hand. Then we'll go back to the chat. Eric, your question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Just a question about the program we're considering. So we're based in Miami, a music organization, and we are in the process of trying to jump into new cities very slowly. We're considering going into somewhere in New Mexico. Is that something where it wouldn't be necessarily a new idea, but it would be a new program in a new location with a whole new set of variables that we'd have to figure out? So is this kind of, would this be something that falls under something that would get funded possibly? Like expanding to a new city or trying something different?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this does not need to be a new or innovative project to fund. We, again, are looking at existing programs, new programs, specific projects, organizational support. It really can be anything. I think the most important thing from my perspective, if you're expanding into new territories, what's your connection to that population? Do you know the older adults in that area? Do you understand what their needs are? What would your goals be with respect to improving the lives of folks in that area? So those would be the key things for any expansion opportunity or new programming. We just want to understand that you're connected to that population, you know them, and you understand what your goals are related to serving them.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Tiff, back to the chat.
Sure. This is a quick one. Someone asked if the pictures on our website, when you download them, they have a watermark, and if you can download them without the watermark. And yes, you just have to create a little account with your name and email, and then you're able to download the full resolution without the watermark. And then the next question, Chandra. So in the presentation, it was indicated that governmental entities can apply for funding. And the question is, how appropriate is it for government agencies such as CDOT to apply? How often are government agencies applying for these types of opportunity?
We're seeing pretty regular requests from government entities. So yeah, it's perfectly appropriate for a government entity to apply. I think again, it's about narrowing that focus, especially for CDOT, who serves the entire state and the entire population of Colorado. What are the goals related to older adults? What are those funds specifically going to be used for? That would be the primary focus, but absolutely, we fund government entities all the time.
Okay, the next question is about goals. Are goals only numeric, or can they be qualitative outcomes? Is there a sweet spot for the size of the grant?
That's such a great question. And, we've talked a little bit about goals internally, and I think that so often I come not so long ago from a nonprofit organization and wrote many a grant application in my day as well. And we're very accustomed to outcome measurements and, data and metrics and timelines. And what we really want to understand is, what are you trying to do? What are you doing that's going to improve the lives of older adults? And so if that is articulated for you in very, outcome focused, measurement focused types of goals, we just want to make sure we understand how those are going to improve the lives of older adults. If it's more storytelling and this is what we're trying to do, we're completely open to those types of goals as well. I think it's really just about making that connection to the population and understanding what you're trying to do in terms of improving the lives of older adults. Tiff, is there anything you would add to that with respect to goals?
Not really, just, basically what we're going to look for is, are the goals related directly to improving the lives of older adults? And does it make sense that the use of the funds helps you to achieve those goals?
Maureen, I see your hand up.
Hi there. First of all, I just want to thank you for making this flexible funding. It seems like so often we're kind of in the position of trying to create programs to get funding, and this is wonderful to have a flexible program. I work for a visiting nurse association, one of the VNAs outside of your area. So I'm in the 20% category. And our goal is to keep seniors, your folks, in their homes as long as it's safe and comfortable for them to be there. That's what we do. We send people out to care for them. And this may be a conversation for a personal phone call, but we have one program here. It's called Choices for Care. It is the program that's been designed by the government to help people stay in their homes. Our employees go out and provide help with activities of daily living. And people literally could not live in their own homes if they didn't have this type of help. And I'm wondering, and this program perennially loses money. Every year it loses money, a lot of money. So I'm curious as to whether I would be better to focus on this program, which provides care for the most vulnerable people in our area, which loses money every year, or whether it would be better to have a larger focus on all the programs that we provide. I just wouldn't want the application to get bounced by someone saying, oh, well, why are they losing money on this stupid thing every year? Yeah. And it's government reimbursable, blah, blah, blah. But do you have any advice about that?
I would encourage you to set up a call with one of our program officers or one of our staff. It's not, you could get me, you could get Tiff,
Yeah.
But yeah, I would encourage you to set up a call. But just in general, if a program or an organization has a deficit, just as I mentioned the surplus when I was talking about the needs for funding, it's also your opportunity to explain what might be happening in those financials if you have a deficit. Obviously, we want to look at sustainability of an organization. And I will say, just because you have a deficit or a surplus it does not exclude you from funding.
Okay, yeah, it's
we
a
just wanna
deficit in this program.
understand.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
so
thank you.
that would be your chance if you did focus on that program to really
Yeah.
explain to us what's happening, how do you make up that deficit, how does it keep going, how would these dollars benefit the program overall. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay, is it okay if an existing older adult program starts at the age 60 when NextFifty initiative focuses on age 50 and above?
Yes, of course. Of course, of course.
Perfect. Okay. The next question, are subgrants or dual applications allowed?
Well, that's a good question. I think if you have partnerships, it's not as explicit as if you submitted an application with us before. We've talked specifically about where those funds are going and what types of partnerships you have and looking for kind of formalization of those. We're not really looking at that. We just want to understand how the funds are going to be used. So you would need to explain kind of that flow of funding and how that would be used and ultimately what the goals are of whatever it is we might be funding.
Great. Okay, next question. What if you have two totally different programs running under your 501c3 that are both for older adults? Can the funds be requested and used for both programs?
In a single application, or is it clear?
I believe it's with a single application. So if they requested 150,000, could it be spent amongst two different programs, both serving older adults?
Yes, it absolutely could. I think what you would want to do is make sure that if you're describing both of those programs, also describe what the goals of each of those programs are so that we have an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay, our next question is, what is the typical size of grant awarded?
Oh, that's another very popular question. And it varies every single year. It just fluctuates a great deal. And I think it's really hard to tell with this opportunity, especially because there's a cap to it that we haven't had before. So it's hard to have kind of comparable data. I will tell you that probably over 50% of the applications we received last cycle were $50,000 or less.
Okay, is the financial audit requirement applicable to just this funding opportunity or all of NextFifty initiatives funding opportunities?
Is that with respect to the compilation or financial review, or does it?
I'm not sure. Is that April?
The only other funding opportunity we have open right now is our community response fund, and that is capped at $25,000. So there is no audit requirement there, but the audit requirements in line with previous funding opportunities that we've had.
Yeah, so I'll just add that, in order to request over $25,000, the audit is required for you to go above that amount. $25,000 and below, there is not an audit requirement. And then there's a caveat that if it's a really small organization with an annual operating budget of $250,000 or less, to request over $25,000, you can submit a financial compilation or a financial review that was done externally in lieu of the audit. Okay, the next one. Can these funds be used for capital?
Yes, they may. I think that the one key there again is just understanding the goals of that capital campaign and how, again, they're going to improve the lives of older adults. So that would be just as crucial as it is in any other type of application.
Just going to kind of expand on that question. I'm not sure if they were, could it also be used for a capital improvement?
Yes.
Or a capital purchase? Okay.
Yes. Same thing related to the goals.
Perfect. Okay. Next question. If a grant is awarded, say in June of 2022, does the grant end on December 31st of 2022 or June of 2023?
It would end in June of 2023. So it's a year from basically when you sign that grant agreement or when you sort of negotiate the start of that grant agreement with your program officer.
Okay, and this one is relation to partial granted a smaller amount.
Tiff, you froze for just a second
Oh.
for me as you started to read the question. Could you read it again?
Sure. It's relating to partial funding. Is it possible that a grant would be requested for a larger amount but awarded a smaller amount?
That is possible in this cycle. Our goal with applying a maximum amount to request is to try to avoid partial funding in this cycle. But as we saw with the last cycle of flexible support, it was very, very competitive, and we had to look at applications and make some decisions about partial funding. So that is a possibility, but our goal is to avoid that.
Very good. Another question sort of around the grant term. How long does an organization have to expend grant funds once the funds have been awarded?
Again, it would just be based on your grant agreement. So we send funds very quickly after that grant agreement is signed. And so you will receive those funds. If you want to start your program or you want to start expending those funds in 3 months, that's perfectly fine. We would just establish that as the start date for your project. And then you would have a year from that date to expend the funds.
Great. Okay, another question about the audit, which was already answered. Okay, Erica's asking if they heard from a NextFifty initiative contact person that salaries were an allowable expense. Is it okay if part of that employee's job description falls outside the scope of the NextFifty initiative funded project?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. I think, again, you just have to make certain that these dollars are allocated to the portion of their salary that is dedicated to older adults. And so however, it is easiest for you to clarify that in the application.
Okay. Natalie wants to know, at DHA, we have a nonprofit. Is it better to apply from the nonprofit as it supports the shortfalls within the aging in place program area?
Well, applying through the nonprofit will probably help you avoid a budget template. So I don't know if that, I don't know that there's necessarily a preference in terms of how you apply. Tiff, I don't know if you have a different response to that, but.
I do not have a different one. Okay, next question is about the application itself. On the form, are there length restrictions on responses to the essay questions, either in characters or words?
There are no length restrictions, and we did this intentionally last cycle in flexible support to very mixed reviews. Some people really liked not having character limits. Some people felt very strange not having a character limit. And really, our intent is to create space for you to tell your story. We care more about the content that you enter than how many words or characters it takes you to describe that. And so we opted to continue with no character limits. Really, this is just our attempt to kind of help lower that barrier of complexity to the application. Again, having written grants myself, I have been forced to cut 13 words that felt like I was cutting off parts of my body. So I understand it. And I think we just wanted to create some space and some freedom. And so however many characters it takes you to tell us the story, we care about the content.
Okay, we don't have any hands up. Okay.
Oh, we do have a hand up. You want to jump there? I'm sorry,
Sure.
Natalie, I was not focused over there.
Hi, that's okay. What is your definition of capital?
Oh, I can't say that we have a solid definition of capital. I think that it takes a lot of different forms. You know, it can be purchase of vehicles, a capital campaign to build a building. I think there's just a lot of different versions of capital.
So specifically, I'm thinking of computers for computer labs or printers or things of that nature. Do you consider that capital or program expenses?
I would consider that equipment for program expenses.
Okay.
But I don't know that you necessarily need to specify. If you tell us what it's for,
Okay.
and make the case, it's appropriate.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, back to the chat. When applying on behalf of a specific department or office that's focused on serving older adults within a city government, would you like to see the budget of both that specific department or office as well as the entire city budget?
Tip, I'll ask you to help me with this one because I know we made some changes to this cycle and what budgets we're requiring, and my brain is foggy.
Yeah, this one is tricky, but basically we would like to see the program or the office related budget. And then that being said, there may be a chance, we do have our director of finance and accounting that does review financials with the program officer. And so you may be contacted to get some more specific information, but it's really difficult to get information we need from an entire city's budget that has, 300 and some pages of information. So the more specific budget specifically related to older adults is a good place for us for you to start when you submit the application, and then we'll reach out if we need further information.
Thank you.
Okay, here's a question. So from a grantee that received funding through our community response fund last year, are asking, is applying for both the flexible support and community response fund acceptable in 2022?
Yes, it is. You can apply for both opportunities.
The only caveat there is that community response fund is limited to Colorado organizations.
And it's one-time expenses related to improving the lives of older adults, whereas flexible support obviously is more flexible.
Great. Our next question, does NextFifty initiative have an interest in funding medical research into diseases that affect older adults, or should a proposal focus more on direct care?
Oh, that's a great question. We have historically not funded certain types of research, and we haven't really had that conversation as it relates to flexible support. But it might be a good idea to schedule a time to talk with a program officer or a staff member at NextFifty initiative to get into kind of specifics of what type of research you're looking at, and have that conversation there. That would be my recommendation. Tiff, I don't know if you have anything.
No, my first instinct was to schedule a call with a program officer so that you're able to talk specifically about what you're thinking and get guidance around your specific ideas. This one we kind of went into, but Chandra, if you want to expand a little bit, it's talking about the application and the lack of word count or character limits. Is there any guidance on depth, detail, or length that we're looking for in applications?
No, honestly, it's about what you think it takes to explain your connection to the population, your goals related to how you'll use the funding, how the funds will be used. There's no perfect template in my mind or in the mind of our reviewers. It's really about the content of the information. And so we don't have any guidance. I think the one thing that we tell people a lot is one beneficial tip, in my opinion, is to have someone unfamiliar with either your organization or the project or the program read the application. Does it make sense to them? You know, we come into it cold. We may not know anything about what you've submitted to us. And so making sure that someone who isn't as close to it as you may be as a grant writer or program administrator or whatever your role may be, you're obviously close to it. And so there might be holes in that information that someone who's unfamiliar with it can help you fill in. That would probably also be beneficial to us as reviewers of the application.
Okay, now we have a question. So we covered part of this of funding across multiple programs at one 501c3. How about submitting multiple applications for multiple programs at one 501c3? And this particular one is limited to a $25,000 amount ask.
So that is allowable. We have historically only allowed one application per EIN number. And this year we are not putting that restriction in place. So you can submit multiple applications. I mean, you'd be competing with yourself potentially. And so, you know, you'd want to make sure that they were both really good applications. But yes, that's allowable.
I think we're getting towards the end of the question in the chat. One more is, would building offices within the organization be allowed as part of the grant?
If you can demonstrate the benefit to older adults, again, I think, you know, the focus of this fund, these funds are really geared to how are they going to be used to improve the lives of older adults. And so that would be the key connection to make in my mind.
The questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody else has anything they want to ask live.
I think we probably have time for one more question if anyone has anything else. Cheryl.
Okay, thanks. This is probably under the funding for startup programs and capital, but I just want to be clear that that would include money for infrastructure to get a program going. And if so an infrastructure, would that be covered?
It would. Again, the key is tying that to how it's going to improve the lives of older adults or benefit older adults. And so making sure that, that you can make that connection, that is the most crucial component. And Chris will let you sneak in with one last question.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. So just circling back to the recent question about multiple requests by one organization that would be for a $25,000 grant. Would each submission be for up to $25,000, or is the organization, because of its size, limited to $25,000 during the grant period, total award?
Well, that's a great question too. What are your thoughts on that?
So your particular organization can only apply for $25,000 because of the audit requirement, I'm assuming?
Yes.
So I would say that if you submitted multiple applications, we would review them each separately at that $25,000 max. However, if a couple of them were to make it into potentially recommending to fund, I think that we would only be able to fund one up to $25,000 because it doesn't have that audit requirement. So you could submit them, but they couldn't all be funded.
Okay, so, but then would you all be looking at them in total with the organization or as the organization and say, hey, this one looks really good. Let's give this one $20,000 and these other ones, we'll say no one to one and we'll give $5,000 to another. I mean, would it be better to submit it as one, knowing that $25,000 is the max that the organization can get?
I think
I
if
guess my
you want
question
to
is-
be, yeah, I think if you want to be able to say where those funds go and how they're used, then you're better to submit, in my opinion, one application. This would be another one that I think would be a good call, and talk directly with the program officer. They can get into a bit more detail with you. But if you know, I think you'd probably rather dictate where those funds go as opposed to having us dictate where those funds go based on the applications you submit.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, that is all the time we have for today. And I will tell you, I was nervous today about dead air, and we did not have any dead air. So thank you for your fabulous questions. Thank you for participating. Thank you for showing up. We really hope this session was helpful for you. And we hope you'll take advantage of the opportunity to talk directly with staff if you still have additional questions, and or if you have some specific questions about your application itself. As I said, we really want this opportunity to be as flexible as possible and respond to the goals of your organization in terms of how to improve the lives of older adults, because it helps us achieve our mission as an organization. So once again, please do take the time to visit our website. There's lots of information up there to help guide you as you prepare the application. And we really appreciate each and every question we received. If we didn't get to any questions that were either submitted in the registrations, or if you had others, please don't hesitate again to call. But we will follow up with an email with answers to any questions that we didn't get to today. There will also be a link to a short survey in that email. We'd love to know if this session was helpful to you, and if we should do it again and how we might improve it. So please take the time to send that information, and we will make sure to include a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. And there was something else. I'm sure Amy noted it. But thank you all again so much for your attendance. Appreciate it, and best of luck to you all.